Ana Walshe, a name that, just a little over a year ago, meant nothing to the world outside her close friends, family, and colleagues. She wasn't a celebrity, not a politician, not someone with 1 million followers on social media. She was just a woman, a hard-working, ambitious, and loving mother of 3 trying to build a life for herself and her family. But then, on New Year's Day 2023, something happened. Something so dark, so chilling, that her name would soon be everywhere, plastered across news stations, online articles, true crime discussions. And not because she did something amazing. No, because she vanished. Now let's rewind for a second. It's December 31st, 2022. New Year's Eve. While most people are preparing for parties, setting resolutions they won't keep, or enjoying one last cheap meal before their new diet starts, Ana Walshe was wrapping up the last day of the year like any other. She had spent the holiday season with her family, her 3 young kids, her husband Brian Walshe, and probably 1 million things on her mind. Because Ana, she wasn't just any woman. She was driven. Born in Serbia, Ana had come to the United States determined to make something of herself. She built a successful career in real estate, something a lot of people dream about but never quite achieve. And she wasn't just doing okay, she was thriving. She had a high-ranking job in Washington, D.C., working as an executive for Tishman Speyer, one of the top real estate firms out there. She owned properties, she had connections, and most importantly, she had plans. And those plans didn't necessarily include her husband, Brian. See, while Ana was out there hustling, Brian was, well, let's just say he had a different reputation. Unlike Ana, who had worked hard to build a future, Brian had built a life of lies. He was a con artist. The kind of guy who didn't just tell little white lies, no. We're talking full-blown federal fraud. Years before Ana went missing, Brian had already been caught scamming people with fake Andy Warhol paintings. And not in some low-stakes, eBay-type scam, no. He was selling forgeries to elite art buyers, promising authenticity while peddling fakes. That little stunt got him in deep trouble with the feds. And by the time Ana's disappearance happened, he was already on house arrest. So yeah, this guy, not exactly a man of integrity. Now back to that night, New Year's Eve. Ana had a flight booked for Washington, D.C. on January 1st. She was supposed to head back for work. Her job was important, and she wasn't the type to just skip a commitment. She'd done this plenty of times before. Traveling back and forth between Massachusetts and D.C. was nothing new for her. But this time, she never made it to the airport. Her colleagues in D.C. were the first to notice something was off. When Ana didn't show up for work on January 3rd, they got worried. This was not like her. She was punctual, reliable, the kind of person who, if she was going to be late, would at least let someone know. But silence. Her phone? Off. Her messages? Unanswered. Her presence? Non-existent. By January 4th, a missing person report was officially filed. But here's where things get even weirder. When police started asking questions, Brian seemed cooperative at first. He told them that Ana had left early on the morning of January 1st to catch a flight. He said she grabbed a ride to the airport around 4 or 5 a.m., and that was the last he saw of her. Sounds simple enough, right? But here's the thing. There was no record of Ana ever getting in a car that morning. No Uber, no taxi, no traffic cams catching her walking to a station, and most importantly, no record of her getting on a flight. Now, unless Ana suddenly developed the ability to teleport, something was very, very wrong with Brian's story. So police started digging deeper, and what they found was the beginning of a nightmare. Brian Walshe, despite acting like the worried husband, wasn't exactly hiding his tracks well. Police checked his movements, his purchases, his internet search history, and what they found was, to put it lightly, absolutely horrifying. While Ana was supposedly on a plane to DC, Brian was busy buying hundreds of dollars worth of cleaning supplies, bleach, trash bags, a mop, and oh yeah, a hacksaw. Then came the Google searches. Brace yourselves for this one. On the morning of January 1st, just hours after Ana supposedly left for the airport, Brian was sitting at home, typing out searches that would make even the dumbest criminal cringe. We're talking, how long before a body starts to smell? How to dispose of a 115-pound woman, which for the record was Ana's exact weight. Can you identify a body with broken teeth? Like, dude. If Google had a congratulations, you're definitely going to prison award, Brian would have won it immediately. And as police kept investigating, more and more damning evidence surfaced. Blood in the basement, a bloody knife wrapped up and hidden, security footage of Brian driving to dumpsters in different locations, as if one wasn't enough. And then, the biggest mistake of all, some of the trash bags Brian dumped were retrieved before they could be destroyed. Inside, blood-stained rags, towels, and a broken Ana Walshe ID. By this point, police weren't just suspicious. They knew. Ana Walshe hadn't left for work. She was never on a flight. She wasn't just missing. She was gone. And the man who was supposed to love her, the father of her children, wasn't looking for her. He was trying to erase her. All right, so here's where things start to get really sketchy. Ana Walshe, this successful, ambitious woman, was supposed to leave for Washington, D.C. on January 1st, 2023. She had a high-powered job in real estate, and she wasn't the kind of person who would just randomly skip out on work. We're talking about someone who had built her life on being responsible, punctual, and put together. So when she didn't show up, it was weird. And when police started asking questions, guess who had a perfectly reasonable explanation? Her husband, Brian Walshe. Brian told them that Ana had gotten up early that morning, somewhere around 4 or 5 m-to head to the airport. He claimed she had a flight to catch to Washington, D.C., where she worked, and that she left their home in Cohasset, Massachusetts, in a hurry. Now, at first glance, that doesn't sound all that suspicious, right? People travel early all the time. But when investigators started actually looking into his story, that's when they found some serious red flags. Because here's the problem with Brian's little bedtime story. There was no record of Ana ever getting on a flight. No ticket scanned, no luggage checked in, no boarding pass used, nothing. And it gets even worse. There wasn't just no flight record, there was no record of her even getting to the airport in the first place. Let's think about this. If Ana actually left the house that morning, she would have needed to get to the airport somehow. It's not like Logan Airport is just a short stroll away from their home in Cohasset. She would have needed a ride, an Uber, a taxi, a friend picking her up, something. So investigators started checking every possible transportation record. No Uber or Lyft rides requested from her account. No taxi service reports picking her up. No security footage of her at any train or bus stations. You're telling me a woman woke up at 4 a.m., somehow teleported to the airport, and then disappeared into thin air? Yeah, not buying it. And neither were the police. Because let's be real, airports have security cameras everywhere. There's no way you can get through check-in, TSA, boarding, and onto a plane without leaving some kind of digital or visual footprint. Even if Ana had just walked into the airport and decided to turn around and leave, there would have been at least one sighting of her. But there was nothing. It was as if Ana had never left the house at all. And that's when detectives started putting the pieces together. Because if Ana never got in a car, never showed up on a flight manifest, and never made it to DC, then there was only one logical explanation. She never left home that morning. And if she never left, that meant someone was lying. And all eyes turned to Brian. But of course Brian stuck to his story. He told police the same thing over and over again. She left early. She had a flight. That's all I know. But here's the thing about liars. They always mess up. And Brian? Oh, he messed up big time. Because while police were digging into Ana's travel records and coming up with nothing, they decided to check Brian's movements on January 1st. And guess what? Instead of being a worried husband, calling his wife, tracking her flight, or texting her to make sure she landed safely, Brian was on Google. And let me tell you his search history. It was bad. We're talking full on, you might as well confess right now, level bad. Because at 4:55 a.m., right around the time he claimed Ana left, Brian was at home, typing out, "How long before a body starts to smell? Excuse me? Sir." Then, just minutes later, "How to dispose of a body." And as if that wasn't suspicious enough, he kept going. Search after search, he practically outlined a murder plot in real time. And the biggest giveaway. One of his searches was how to dispose of a 115-pound woman, which, oh wow, just happens to be Ana's exact weight. So at this point, let's just call it like it is. Brian wasn't looking up flight schedules. Brian wasn't checking Ana's travel itinerary. Brian wasn't a worried husband trying to find his missing wife. Brian was a man panicking because whatever happened to Ana didn't happen at the airport. It happened at home. And instead of coming up with an actual believable alibi, Brian did what so many dumb criminals do. He underestimated how easy it is to track digital evidence. Because sure, maybe back in the 1950s, you could get away with telling police she left for a trip and never came back. But in 2023, bro, we have technology. And that technology immediately proved that Brian was full of it. Because not only did Ana never make it to the airport, but Brian's own phone records showed something even worse. On the day Ana supposedly left, guess where his phone pinged? Near Home Depot, where he bought hundreds of dollars worth of cleaning supplies. Near dumpsters in multiple locations. And at home when he should have been asleep. But instead, he was making those disturbing Google searches. And just like that, Brian's entire alibi fell apart. Because let's be real, a woman doesn't just disappear without a trace. Flights leave records. Airports have security cameras. People don't just magically vanish. And the only person insisting Ana left that morning was the one person with every reason to lie, Ana Walshe. And that's when police knew Ana Walshe never left for the airport, because she never had the chance. All right, buckle up, because this part of the story is where things take a turn from suspicious to downright horrifying. So by this point, Ana Walshe was missing. Her co-workers were concerned, the police were involved, and all eyes were on her husband, Ana Walshe. And Brian was doing his best to act like a worried husband. He told police that Ana left early on January 1st to catch a flight, and he had no idea what happened to her after that. But here's the thing about Brian, he wasn't exactly good at covering his tracks. Because while police were digging into Ana's disappearance, they got a hold of Brian's digital footprint. And what they found wasn't just suspicious, it was damning. Let's talk about Google searches. Now, we've all Googled some weird things, right? Maybe a random medical symptom or something bizarre just out of curiosity. But Brian's searches, they weren't curious, they were straight up terrifying. At 4:55 a.m., just minutes after he claimed Ana left for the airport, Brian was already on Google, typing out, "How long before a body starts to smell?" Excuse me, sir? Your wife just left for a flight, and the first thing you do is look up decomposition times. That's not concerned husband behavior, that's I need to figure out how much time I have before someone notices behavior. But Brian didn't stop there. Oh no. Just a few minutes later, he searched how to stop a body from decomposing, how to dispose of a body. Can you throw away body parts? I mean, at this point it's not even subtle. This man was basically screaming, I did something terrible, and I don't know how to cover it up. And if you think that's bad, we're just getting started. Because over the next few hours, Brian kept going. Search after search, he practically wrote a manual for getting rid of evidence. How to clean blood from a wooden floor. What's the best way to dismember a body? Can you identify a body with broken teeth? Oh, and here's the worst part, one of his searches. How to dispose of a 115-pound woman. And you know what's really disturbing? Ana weighed 115 pounds. That's not some random number. That's her exact weight. So let's just take a second to acknowledge how terrifying this is. Because Brian wasn't Googling some hypothetical situation. He wasn't watching a crime show and getting curious about forensics. No, this was specific. This was deliberate. And what does that tell us? Brian wasn't panicking, wondering where his wife had gone. He was trying to make sure no one ever found her. And the deeper police dug, the worse it got. Because it turns out that Brian had been planning for this. Investigators didn't just find searches from January 1st, they found even more disturbing searches from the days leading up to Ana's disappearance. What is the best way to get rid of a body? How to make a body disappear forever? How long does DNA last? I mean, seriously. This guy might as well have just walked into the police station and handed them a confession. But wait, it gets even worse. Because not only was Brian obsessively searching for ways to cover up a crime, but he was also making purchases that lined up exactly with his searches. On January 2nd, the day after Ana supposedly left for the airport, Brian went on a little shopping spree. And guess what he bought? $450 worth of cleaning supplies from Home Depot. Bleach, trash bags, a mop, protective gloves, buckets. Oh, and just in case that wasn't enough to make police go, yeah, this guy's guilty as hell, Brian also bought a hacksaw. So let's review. 1. Googles how to dispose of a body. 2. Googles how to clean up blood. 3. Buys industrial strength cleaning supplies. 4. Buys a freaking hacksaw. I mean, did he think no one would put this together? And as police kept digging, they found even more proof. Because remember how Brian claimed that Ana left for the airport on January 1st? Well, turns out his own phone betrayed him. Instead of staying home, worried about his missing wife, Brian's phone pinged in multiple locations around Massachusetts, including a dumpster site, a hardware store, and multiple trash bins spread across different areas. Oh, and guess what? Some of the trash bags he dumped were recovered before they could be destroyed. And inside, blood-stained towels, a broken knife, a damaged Ana Walshe ID'd. At this point, Brian didn't just a bill of tellers, might didn't just tattoo him, I did it across his forehead. And the kicker, the police had all of this evidence before they even officially arrested him. Brian probably thought he was being so clever. He thought he could just lie his way out of it, pretend Ana left for work, and no one would question him. But what he didn't realize, Google doesn't forget. Surveillance cameras don't forget. Phone records don't forget. And the truth always comes out. All right, let's talk about the shopping trip that sealed Brian Walshe's fate. Now, if there's one thing we've learned from true crime cases, it's this: killers are always caught because they think they're smarter than everyone else. They believe they can clean up their mess, dispose of all the evidence, and just walk away like nothing ever happened. But what they don't realize, security cameras are everywhere, and Brian Walshe, he got caught. So, let's rewind to January 2nd, 2023, the day after Ana Walshe supposedly left for the airport. While her co-workers were getting concerned because she hadn't shown up for work in Washington, D.C., Brian was out running some very suspicious errands. Now, if your wife just left for a business trip, you might go about your usual day. Maybe you'd grab a coffee, take care of the kids, or check in on her to see if she landed safely. But Brian, he went shopping. Not for groceries, not for something innocent, not for anything a normal husband would buy. No, this man walked into a Home Depot in Rockland, Massachusetts, and security cameras caught every second of it. Now, before I tell you what he bought, let's just take a moment to acknowledge how stupid this was. Because Brian was already on house arrest for an unrelated federal fraud case, and because of that he had to get special permission to leave his house. When he left home on January 2nd, he was only supposed to be dropping his kids off at school. But instead, he took a detour, and Home Depot's security cameras saw everything. He walked into the store wearing a medical mask and gloves, which, let's be honest, was already super suspicious. I mean, it wasn't 2020 anymore. People weren't just casually wearing gloves inside stores. This man was trying to hide his identity, but he failed miserably because, hello, security cameras don't just look at your hands. And here's what he bought: a mop and bucket atop multiple rolls of trash bags, cleaning supplies, including ammonia and bleach, a hacksaw. Now, let's break this down because none of this looks good. If you're buying a hacksaw, you're cutting something. And in Brian's case, it wasn't wood. If you're buying bleach and ammonia, you're trying to clean up something really bad. If you're buying a top, you're probably trying to wrap up something you don't want people to see. And trash bags, well, you don't need those unless you're planning to throw something away. And here's where Brian's mistake gets even worse, because when he checked out, he paid in cash. Now, let's just pause for a second, because who the hell pays in cash at Home Depot in 2023? Most people just tap their card, maybe use Apple Pay or swipe and go. But Brian, he used cash because he actually thought that it would make him harder to track. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Because while cash transactions don't leave a digital paper trail, security cameras do. And the second police got their hands on that footage, it was game over. Now you might be thinking, okay, maybe he just needed to clean up something else in the house. Maybe there's an innocent explanation. No, because this wasn't the only time Brian went shopping for crime scene cleanup supplies. On January 3rd, the next day, he went to another store. And guess what he bought this time? More trash bags, more cleaning supplies, more plastic containers. At this point, it was obvious what he was doing. Brian wasn't just cleaning up a mess. He was getting rid of evidence. But here's the thing about evidence, it has a way of coming back to haunt you. Because all of those trash bags he bought, well, Brian didn't get rehanded fast enough. And when police searched multiple dumpsters, guess what they found? Trash bags filled with blood-stained towels, a broken knife with Anna's blood on it, a bloody rug, a damaged Ana Walshe ID. At this point, it was over for Brian. Because the security footage, that was the beginning of the end. It showed clear, undeniable proof that Brian Walshe had purchased everything you'd need to cover up a murder, and no amount of lying could save him now. Because you can tell police whatever story you want. But security cameras? They don't lie. All right, here's where things get really disturbing. By this point in the investigation, police already had a mountain of evidence stacking up against Brian Walshe. His Google searches were basically a confession. His shopping spree for cleaning supplies and a hacksaw was caught on security cameras. And let's not forget, he was dumping trash bags in dumpsters across multiple locations. But what they found next? This was the moment where the case turned from suspicious disappearance to full-blown murder investigation. Because when police searched the Walshe family home, they made a horrifying discovery in the basement. Now, I want you to imagine this from the perspective of the investigators. They walked into this beautiful house in Cohasset, Massachusetts, a place where Ana had lived, worked, and raised her kids. A home that was supposed to be filled with love and family moments. But instead, it was a crime scene. And in the basement, that's where they found the first real piece of physical evidence that screamed foul play. Tucked away in a corner of the basement, police found a bloody knife. Now, let me be clear, this wasn't just any knife. This was a kitchen knife with traces of blood on the blade. And not just a small amount, like someone cut their finger while cooking. There was enough blood to suggest something violent had happened. But here's the part that made everyone's stomach drop. The police ran forensic tests, and guess whose blood it was? Ana Walshe's. At this point, the investigation was no longer about finding Ana alive. It was about proving Brian had killed her. But the knife wasn't the only thing they found in the basement. because when they started examining the floors, they noticed something strange. There were traces of blood in multiple spots, like someone had tried to clean it up but didn't do a good enough job. Now, if you've ever watched a true crime show, you know that blood is one of the hardest things to fully erase. You can scrub all you want, pour bleach, even repaint over it, but if forensic teams use luminol, they can still see the stains. And guess what? Luminol tests lit up in multiple places in that basement. That meant one thing: something violent had gone down in that basement, and it was directly connected to Ana Walshe's disappearance. Now, let's break this down. At this point, police already knew Brian had lied about Ana's whereabouts. They knew he had bought cleaning supplies and a hacksaw. They knew he had been Googling how to get rid of a body. And now, they had blood evidence in the house. If you're Brian Walshe, this is worst-case scenario. Because you can try to make excuses for the Google searches. You can say, "Oh, I was just curious. It doesn't mean I did anything." You can try to explain away the Home Depot purchases. You can say, "I just needed cleaning supplies." That's normal. But blood in the basement? Anna's blood on a knife? There's no innocent explanation for that. And this is where police started piecing together their theory of what happened. They believed that at some point, either late on December 31st or in the early hours of January 1st, something happened between Brian and Ana in that house. Maybe it was an argument that escalated into violence. Maybe Brian had been planning this for days. Maybe Ana never even made it out of that house alive. But one thing was clear: the basement was where the crime had started. Now, remember, Brian had claimed Ana left for the airport early on January 1st. He acted like he had no clue where she went. But the evidence in the basement told a different story. Because if Ana had actually left the house that morning like Brian said, why was her blood in the basement? Why was there a knife covered in her DNA? Why were there cleaning supplies scattered around, as if someone had desperately tried to erase the truth? And most importantly, why wasn't Ana anywhere to be found? This was the moment where investigators knew without a doubt that Brian wasn't just a concerned husband. He was a murderer. But here's the thing. As much as this evidence was damning, police still didn't have a body. Ana was gone. And without a body, they knew Brian would try to claim there was no proof that she was dead. So the question became, where was Ana's body? And that's when investigators started looking at the trash bags Brian had dumped, because if they couldn't find Ana whole, maybe they could find what was left behind. And what they found next, it was even more horrifying than the bloody knife. Alright, this is where things get truly disturbing. By now, investigators already had a strong case against Brian Walshe. His Google searches were straight out of a killer's handbook. His shopping spree for cleaning supplies and a hacksaw was caught on security cameras. And let's not forget the blood evidence in the basement. That alone was enough to tell police that Ana never left that house alive. But here's the thing about crime scenes: even the most calculated criminals make mistakes. Brian thought he was smart. Brian thought he could clean up the mess. Brian thought no one would ever find Ana. But he was wrong. Because while police were busy searching the Walshe home, they also had another critical lead: Brian's trash disposal trips. See, after committing the crime, Brian didn't just sit around. He moved fast. He knew he had a problem. A body that needed to disappear, evidence that had to be destroyed, and a police department that was already asking questions. So what did he do? He took out the trash. Now, at first glance, that might seem like a normal thing to do. But this wasn't your average garbage run. Brian drove to multiple dumpsters in different locations, tossing out bags like he was trying to scatter evidence across different areas, hoping no one would ever find them. But here's where he completely screwed up, because one of those dumpsters, it led to a waste transfer station. And that's where investigators hit the jackpot. At this particular facility, trash doesn't just disappear into oblivion. The garbage is sorted, processed, and sometimes examined before being shipped off to landfills. And when investigators started digging through the piles of trash, they found something that stopped them cold: a black trash bag. Now, this wasn't just any bag, because when they opened it, the truth about Ana's fate spilled out. Inside the bag, police found Ana's bloody clothing, items she had likely been wearing the last time she was seen alive, blood-stained towels, and rags, signs of a frantic cleanup attempt, a broken knife, the kind of thing you might use in an attack. and most damning of all, Anna's ID. Now think about this for a second. Ana was supposed to be traveling for work. She was supposed to have left for the airport on January 1st. So why in the world would her personal ID be stuffed inside a garbage bag covered in blood? Because she never left. This was it. This was the moment investigators knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they weren't just dealing with a missing persons case. They were dealing with a murder. Now let's talk about why this bag was so critical. First, it destroyed Brian's alibi. Remember, he had been acting like he had no idea where Ana was. He played the part of the worried husband, pretending he was just as confused as everyone else. But his wife's bloodied belongings and ID, buried in a trash bag, inside a facility miles from their home, told a different story. Second, it showed his attempts to cover up the crime. The bloody towels, the broken knife, the carefully disposed clothing, all of it screamed that Brian had tried to erase what he had done. But here's where Brian really messed up. He thought that once the trash was gone, it was gone forever. But evidence doesn't just disappear. And now detectives had physical proof that Brian was hiding something. At this point, Brian Walshe wasn't just a suspect anymore. He was the prime suspect in a homicide investigation. But there was still one big problem: they hadn't found Ana's body. Brian had clearly done everything he could to get rid of the evidence. So the question now was, where was the rest of Ana? And the answer, even more horrifying than what they had already found. Let's take a step back and talk about who Brian Walshe really was. Because this man wasn't some loving, devoted husband who just suddenly snapped one day. No, Brian had a long history of deception, manipulation, and crime. And if you look at his past, you'll realize that what happened to Ana wasn't just some tragic accident or spur-of-the-moment act. This was a man with a pattern of dishonesty and control, and Ana was trying to get away. First, let's talk about Brian's history of fraud. Because before he was accused of murdering his wife, Brian was already a convicted felon. And we're not talking about minor offenses, we're talking about federal fraud charges. The guy had literally been caught selling fake Andy Warhol paintings to unsuspecting buyers. Here's what happened. Brian had taken 2 real Warhol paintings, actual pieces of valuable art, and used them to create forgeries. Then he sold the fakes on eBay for tens of thousands of dollars, pretending they were real. And when the buyers figured out they had been scammed, Brian did what he always did: lied, made excuses, and tried to cover his tracks. But here's the thing about fraud: it catches up with you eventually. And in 2021, Brian pleaded guilty to multiple fraud charges. That meant he was now under federal supervision, waiting to be sentenced. And because of that, he was on house arrest, wearing an ankle monitor, and only allowed to leave for specific, court-approved reasons. Now think about this for a second. Brian was already in serious legal trouble. He was facing prison time for the fraud case. His entire reputation was ruined. And on top of that, his marriage was falling apart. Because Ana, she wanted out. According to reports, Ana had been telling friends she wanted to leave Brian. She was tired of the marriage, tired of his lies, tired of the stress and uncertainty. She had 3 young kids, a thriving career in real estate, and a life that without Brian probably would have been so much easier. And it's not just that Ana wanted a divorce. It's that she was financially independent. She didn't need Brian. She was the one making the money. She was the one keeping things together. And Brian was a guy with no job, a fraud conviction, and a future that looked pretty bleak. So let's put this in perspective. Brian was under house arrest, wearing an ankle monitor, and basically stuck in his own home while Ana was out there building her success. She was flying to different cities, working with high-end clients, and thriving in her career. Meanwhile, Brian was watching everything slip away. And Ana leaving, that would have been the ultimate loss for him. If Ana left, Brian would have no wife, no money, no control over the kids, and nothing left to his name except a pending prison sentence. And that's why this case is so chilling. Because when you look at the situation through Brian's eyes, you start to see his motive crystal clear. He was losing control over Ana. He was about to lose his cushy lifestyle. He was about to face serious consequences for his past fraud. And instead of facing reality, instead of just accepting that Ana was leaving, Brian did what Brian always did. He took the easy way out. He tried to cover his tracks. He chose deception and violence over accountability. Now, let's talk about the days leading up to Ana's disappearance, because this wasn't just some random act of rage. No, there were warning signs. Ana had been acting distant. She had been expressing concerns about Brian. She had even told friends that she feared something bad might happen. And here's the most chilling part. Ana had a plane ticket out of town on January 1st. She was supposed to leave for work. But was she really just leaving for work? Or was she planning to leave Brian for good? Because when you start connecting the dots, it looks a lot like Ana was getting ready to leave and never come back. And Brian couldn't let that happen. So when he told police that Ana left for the airport early that morning, we now know that was a lie. She never left for the airport. She never got on that plane. She never had the chance to start her new life without Brian. Instead, she was trapped in that house with a man who saw her not as his wife, but as his possession. And Brian, a man who had spent his entire life lying and manipulating people to get what he wanted, decided that if Ana wouldn't stay with him, then she wouldn't be with anyone else either. This case was never about love. It was about control. And when Brian realized he was about to lose control over Ana forever, he did the unthinkable. Let's rewind the clock way before the headlines, before the missing persons reports, before Ana Walshe became the prime suspect in Ana's disappearance. Because here's the thing, this wasn't the first time Ana had been afraid of Brian. This wasn't some out-of-nowhere shocking development. No, the warning signs were there. The red flags had been waving for years. And Ana, she tried to get help. Back in 2014, nearly a decade before she vanished, Ana had already gone to the police. She had already tried to sound the alarm about Brian. She had already told authorities that she was afraid of him. She walked into a police station in Washington, D.C., and filed a report. And in that report, she claimed that Brian had been making threats against her life. Just think about that for a second. This isn't a woman who just suddenly realized she was in danger in 2023. No, Ana had known for years that Brian was capable of something terrifying. She had been so scared of him that she actually went to the police and put it on record. Now let's talk about why that's so significant. Because for anyone who has ever been in an abusive or dangerous relationship, going to the police is not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of courage. Victims often hesitate to report their abusers because they're afraid of what might happen next. What if he finds out? What if he gets angrier? What if no one believes me? Ana made the decision to report Brian anyway. That tells us how serious the situation must have been back then. She must have felt that whatever he was saying, whatever he was doing, whatever threats he was making, it had reached a level where she feared for her safety. But here's where this story takes a frustrating and heartbreaking turn. Because despite Ana coming forward in 2014, despite her saying, "Hey, this man is threatening me, I don't feel safe," nothing happened. No charges were filed. No arrests were made. No protective order was put in place. The report was filed and then nothing. It just disappeared into the system, like so many reports before it. And Brian? He went on with his life, knowing that he had gotten away with it. Now, let's break that down for a second. Brian already had a history of fraud, a man who knew how to lie, manipulate, and deceive people. A man who had no problem stealing, cheating, and conning to get what he wanted. And now, Ana had gone to the police and said, "This man is threatening me." But when nothing happened, what did that teach Brian? It taught him that he could do whatever he wanted, and there would be no consequences. It taught him that he could scare Ana, intimidate her, make her feel unsafe, and no one was going to stop him. And here's what makes this even more disturbing. After Ana reported Brian in 2014, they didn't separate. They didn't go their separate ways. They stayed together. They got married. They had kids. And that might seem confusing at first. Why would Ana stay with someone she was afraid of? But if you know anything about abusive relationships, this is how the cycle works. The abuser makes threats, shows their violent tendencies. The victim speaks out, tries to get help. Nothing happens, the system fails them. The abuser apologizes, manipulates, convinces them to stay. The victim starts to believe maybe it won't happen again. And the cycle repeats itself over and over again. Ana might have thought, maybe I overreacted. Maybe he's changing. Maybe it was just a bad moment. And Brian? He knew exactly what he was doing. Because men like Brian don't change, they just get better at hiding. who they really are. Fast forward to 2023, and now Ana is missing. The same man she was afraid of nearly a decade earlier is now standing in front of police, acting like the concerned husband, pretending he has no idea where she went. But now we know the truth. Ana never had a chance to leave. Brian made sure of that. And maybe, just maybe, if someone had listened to her back in 2014, things would have turned out differently. After everything came crashing down, after the trash bags, the blood evidence, the Google searches, and the damning footage of Brian cleaning supplies, everything finally led to one inevitable conclusion. Brian Walshe was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife, Ana Walshe. But what's even more unsettling about this moment is how cold and calculated Brian remained, even as the walls were closing in around him. Let me take you to January 2023, the time when authorities, after months of searching, piecing together evidence, and running down leads, finally made their move. By this point, investigators had connected all the dots. They had found Ana's bloody belongings in a trash bag at the waste transfer station. They had recovered the bloody knife from the basement, the hacksaw, the trash bags. They knew Ana had been killed in their home. And Brian's lies, his strange behavior, his failed attempts to cover his tracks, had all pointed to him as the killer. But even after all this, when Brian was charged with first-degree murder, he didn't show a single sign of remorse. He didn't seem remotely rattled by the severity of the charges. Instead, he did something that shocked many. He pleaded not guilty. Now imagine that for a second. Here's a man who had already lied to the police, shopped for cleaning supplies, made incriminating Google searches, and disposed of his wife's belongings like garbage. The evidence was overwhelmingly against him, and yet he stood in front of the court with his head held high and denied everything. He wasn't just denying it, he was standing firm, like this was all some twisted mistake, a misinterpretation. He acted as if he was still the victim of some kind of conspiracy. It's mind-boggling, right? How could someone be so cold, so detached, so willing to lie in the face of overwhelming proof? But this wasn't the first time Brian had shown a complete lack of empathy. Remember, this was a man who had built his life on lies. He was a con artist at his core, a person who was willing to deceive, manipulate, and harm others just to preserve his own selfish interests. And in a way, his not guilty plea felt like just another one of those calculated moves, a part of the game he had been playing his whole life. When the charges were read aloud in court, Brian's defense team made it clear that they would be challenging the evidence. They would argue that there were holes in the prosecution's case, that perhaps some of the evidence was circumstantial, or that maybe there was a mix-up along the way. But here's the thing, every piece of evidence pointed directly to him. It wasn't circumstantial, it was damning. The timeline didn't add up. His actions, his behavior, his attempts to cover up the crime, they all painted a picture of a man who planned this murder carefully, and then tried to hide it from the world. But Brian's not guilty plea wasn't just about trying to get away with murder. It was about something else. It was about control. He had controlled Ana for years, manipulated her, threatened her, and lied to her. He thought he could continue to control the narrative, even when the truth was staring him in the face. He probably thought that if he could convince everyone that he didn't do it, that somehow, just maybe, he'd walk away from all of this with his freedom intact. As he stood in court with all eyes on him, you could sense the arrogance behind his plea. He wasn't showing signs of remorse or guilt. He wasn't emotional or broken. Instead, he stood there, like a man who had gotten away with worse things in his life and somehow thought he would get away with this too. But that didn't happen. Because what Brian didn't realize was that this time there was no escape. The police had the evidence. They had the witness statements. They had the motive. They had the forensic proof that linked him to the crime. Brian might have been able to talk his way out of things before, but this time he was caught in a trap of his own making. And the truth was, he couldn't lie his way out of this one. As the months passed after his arrest, the court hearings began, and the weight of the case started to settle in. Brian's not guilty plea would face the harshest scrutiny, and the public attention would only intensify. The case wasn't just about a missing person anymore. It had become a gripping narrative about a man who had betrayed the woman he was supposed to love, a man who had done the unthinkable and then tried to cover it up with lies and deceit. The world watched as Brian's world unraveled, and as the prosecution slowly built its case with more evidence, more shocking revelations, and more proof of Brian's involvement in Anna's brutal death. And in the end, as we all know, this wasn't just about a crime that shocked a family or a community. It was about the tragic end of a woman's life, a woman who tried to escape a dangerous situation for years, only to have her life cut short by the very person who was supposed to protect her. As the trial continues to unfold, Brian may claim he's not guilty, but in the eyes of the world, and in the eyes of everyone who's been following this case, the truth is clear. He took Anna's life, and now he has to face the consequences. Even though Ana Walshe's remains were never found, the investigation into her disappearance and death became one of the most chilling and detailed cases that the authorities had ever dealt with. For a long time, it seemed like Anna had simply vanished. No body, no clear evidence of where she had gone. But what Brian didn't count on, what he didn't realize, was that even in the absence of a body, the overwhelming evidence would eventually tell a story far more horrific than anyone could have imagined. Let me take you through the series of discoveries that ultimately led to Brian's conviction, even without Anna's physical remains. First, let's talk about the investigation itself. As soon as Anna went missing, the authorities started to piece together Brian's movements and actions in the days leading up to her disappearance. They quickly learned that Brian's story didn't add up. He claimed Anna had left for a flight to Boston on New Year's Day, but there was no record of her at the airport, no ticket purchased, and no evidence she had boarded a plane. That was the first red flag. Then came the crucial pieces of physical evidence that would send shockwaves through the investigation. Brian had gone out in the middle of the night and bought a hacksaw, trash bags, and cleaning supplies. Security footage from a local store captured him wearing a dark coat and hat, buying the items. The purchases were far too specific to ignore. Why would he need these items? Why would a man buying cleaning supplies and a hacksaw in the dead of night be anything but suspicious? As authorities dug deeper, they uncovered a bloody knife in the basement of the Walshe home. They also found traces of blood splatter throughout the house. Now, to anyone with even a passing knowledge of forensic science, this wasn't just a random mess. This was evidence of a violent crime, and all signs pointed to the fact that Anna had been the victim of a brutal assault in her own home. Despite all of this, despite the bloody knife and the gruesome crime scene, Brian's story remained the same. He claimed Anna had simply disappeared. He continued to insist that she had gone on a trip and that he had no idea where she had gone or what had happened to her. But here's the thing, the evidence wasn't just circumstantial. It was incriminating. The police recovered Anna's belongings, her bloody clothes, and identification from a trash bag at a nearby waste facility. And it didn't stop there. Forensic teams were able to track the movements of Brian Walshe, his cell phone, and his car. They even found that he had searched online for things like how to dispose of a body and how to clean up blood, searches that no one in their right mind would ever need unless they were planning something deeply sinister. But even without the physical remains of Anna, it was the circumstantial evidence that ultimately tied Brian to the crime. There was simply no other explanation for all the pieces coming together the way they did. What's even more chilling is that, despite this mounting evidence, Brian never broke character. Even after being arrested, after multiple interrogations and intense scrutiny, he still denied any involvement in Anna's death. He held fast to the story that Anna had simply disappeared, and he was just the concerned husband left to pick up the pieces. But the world could see through his lies. And eventually so did the jury. In January 2023, Brian was charged with first-degree murder. Throughout the proceedings, his defense team tried to cast doubt on the case, but it was no use. In the face of all the overwhelming evidence, the bloody knife, the trash bags, the search history, and the incriminating footage, Brian's not guilty plea could no longer be taken seriously. And while Anna's body was never recovered, the evidence of what had happened to her was undeniable. The lack of a body might have made the case more difficult, but it was the chain of events, the suspicious purchases, and the damning physical evidence that ultimately sealed Brian's fate. The pieces fit together in a way that left little room for doubt. The prosecution argued convincingly that Brian had murdered Ana in their home, attempted to clean up the crime scene, and then disposed of her body in an attempt to cover his tracks. The absence of her remains didn't change the fact that Ana had been brutally murdered by the very person who had once sworn to love and protect her. And so, in the end, despite the gaping hole left by the missing body, Brian's conviction was secured. His actions, his lies, his attempts to cover up the murder, and the physical evidence that could not be ignored led to a guilty verdict. He had believed he could outsmart the system, that he could get away with it, but in the end the law and the truth were too powerful. In a tragic twist, Ana Walshe's family and friends would never get the closure of knowing where her remains were buried. But they did receive something just as important: justice. Brian was held accountable for the crime he committed, and even without a body, his guilt was clear. The world now knows the truth about what happened to Ana, and it serves as a chilling reminder of how deeply hidden darkness can lie beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary lives.